Authorial intention is a tricky thing.
You've got a friend in me.
Trying to guess exactly why a director or a screenwriter makes the decisions they make can be a very difficult task, and many times can be done to no avail. For example, when YouTube personality Grace Randolph of Beyond the Trailer recently saw Toy Story 4, these were her thoughts on its ending. No spoilers here.
I also have to say, I think this movie got a little bit socialist, which is a problem in this country, that some people like socialism is creeping up on the United States and people don't seem to be aware of it. I mean, here basically what they're saying is, you've gotten your turn, so give me what you have, just give it to me, you lose it, so that I can get a turn too. I just really couldn't believe that the movie was promoting that.
Yeah. Okay. I don't want to spend time explaining why this is inaccurate, but suffice it to say, this response tweet quite hilariously sums up my feelings as well. I love that Grace Randolph accuses a massive capitalistic mega machine like Disney of teaching her children about socialism. So when returning to the newsroom, I've made several different connections between the material of the show and how that is either a reflection or a commentary on modern society. Speculating about Aaron Sorkin's intentions is certainly something that we can do here, but why bother when he says it outright? In April 2014, between the show's second and third seasons, Sorkin made a public apology.
I think you and I got off on the wrong foot with the newsroom, and I apologize, and I'd like to start over. Okay, because I think that there's been a terrible misunderstanding. I did not set the show in the recent past in order to show the pros how it should have been done. That was and remains the furthest thing from my mind. I wasn't trying to, and I'm not capable of teaching a professional journalist a lesson. That wasn't my intent.
Sorkin goes on to say, quote, "I haven't become an expert in anything. I'm not sophisticated when it comes to politics, when it comes to journalism. I'm not as smart as the characters are, or, as you can see, as articulate. I want to make it clear. I don't know nothing." So let's assume that everything I've stated in the past 3 installments had no motivation, that the newsroom lacked anything to say about modern society, that it didn't attempt to make any commentary on the modern newsroom, and that Aaron Sorkin just sits in his office thinking about the different ways in which he can get Jane Fonda to scream,
"You want to play golf or you want to fuck around?"
We'll even ignore all those times Sorkin's leading characters previously took stands against Don't Ask, Don't Tell and religious fundamentalism, among many other hot-button issues. This all still leaves us with one part of Sorkin's apology I actually skipped over.
I set the show in the recent past because I didn't want to make up fake news.
Possibly the most unique characteristic of the show, the idea that the setting should be as closely aligned with the real world as possible so as to avoid making up the news, ends up being the key to what the newsroom most precisely aims to do, and unironically enough, it sets an unquestionable precedent for modern times. The act of disavowing fake news. Season 3, Episode 5, sees Sloan Sabbath interview Bree Dorrit, the editor of the ACN digital staff and creator of an app called ACN Gauge, which Bree describes as,
"It's a map that tells you where celebrities have been sighted in New York or Los Angeles, and soon will be expanding to Vegas and South Beach. Anytime you want, you can scroll around and see, Jude Law was shopping for condoms at Duane Reade on 57th.
Wait a second. This interview sounds awfully familiar.
The Gawker Stalker map tells you where celebrities have been sighted in New York City at any given time. So you can sort of scroll around and see, Jude Law was shopping for condoms at the Duane Reade in Midtown.
Oh, right, that's it. This is an interview Jimmy Kimmel hosted on CNN Larry King Live back in 2007. In it, he's interviewing Emily Gould, an editor of the site Gawker.com that brought a lot of unwanted attention unto itself for its app. For those of you worried that Sorkin stole dialogue straight from an earlier interview without giving it any acknowledgement, Sorkin plainly states in HBO's behind-the-scenes edition of the episode that this is done fully intentionally.
From time to time on the show, we will take an actual interview that occurred and try to change as little of it as we can.
Before he goes on to explain the source of his inspiration for Sloan's interview. Outside of being given the classic Aaron Sorkin polish and containing the facts that are relevant to this specific story, a large portion of the dialogue is recreated word for word. It really is worth exploring on your own time. But after both Kimmel and Sloan call out the technological service for allowing false posts about Kimmel being visibly intoxicated to spread online.
Post today, a citizen journalist tells us that Jimmy Kimmel was visibly intoxicated last night at the Soho House in West Hollywood.
That's right.
Jimmy Kimmel was with his family in Cabo San Lucas last night.
You post things that simply aren't true on the site. I'll give you an example. There was a story about me that popped up on my Google search. It said, Daily Gawker Stalker, when isn't Jimmy Kimmel visibly intoxicated? I was coming home from my 1-year-old cousin's birthday party with my elderly aunt and uncle and my kids and my cousins.
The most important recreation of dialogue occurs.
AC Engage is citizen journalism.
But what the stalker map is citizen journalism.
People don't read this with the expectation of it being true.
People don't read it with the expectation that every word of it will be gospel.
But you're using the word journalism, which means there is an expectation that what they're reading is true.
There's also a big contradiction. She said citizen journalism. She used the word journalism and then said everybody knows not everything's true. Most journalists at least try for the truth. It's a goal.
The only way Sorkin could be more clear about the message of the scene is if he had had Sloane look into the screen and say, "This is what happens when you spread fake news." Nonetheless, Sorkin seems to support any credible website or source of news information disavowing random and/or anonymous internet sources who post information through these routes and are given the label of journalism. But this is also an isolated case of Sorkin trying to dissect the problem in a show about journalists in a corporate news setting, calling out random citizens pretending to be journalists themselves. So maybe Sorkin doesn't really care to comment upon the accuracy of news media throughout the rest of the show as a whole. I think that would be quite a missed opportunity. Thank goodness he doesn't miss it. The majority of the show's second season plotline revolves around the story of Operation Genoa, a fictionalized military operation about a group of Marines using sarin gas on civilians in Pakistan. The plot of how this unfolded is a little complicated, so bear with me here. One of the new characters of Season 2 is Jerry Dantana, a man from ACN's DC Bureau who's looking to make a name for himself and takes a fervent anti-drone stance in military matters. For a panel on drone strikes, he calls for one of his own military connections, Cyrus West, to appear on a panel discussing this very issue. After the panel, West gives Jerry the scoop to a story about an operation by the name of Genoa in which U.S. soldiers use sarin gas on civilians in Pakistan. Jerry gives the scoop to his new boss, Mackenzie, who expresses doubt over the story, but lets Jerry try to follow up on this lead. Jerry gets another source on the story with Gunnery Sergeant Eric Sweeney, who claims that the story of Genoa is true and that U.S. soldiers did use sarin gas. He claims that he was there when it happened. Mackenzie then agrees to meet Eric with Jerry. Eric comes off as a polite and reserved young man, seemingly without a reason to lie and able to recount details in a realistic and descriptive enough way to convince Mackenzie to finally take action herself. At their meeting, she takes out a notepad and asks him to write down as many names as he can remember that were involved with the operation. Mackenzie and Jerry then take the story to Charlie Skinner, the head of ACN News. While he certainly has his own questions and skepticism, he asks Jerry to continue his investigation, but to do it quietly, considering that these actions would not just constitute an impeachable offense, they would constitute a war crime. Jerry puts together a team of a handful of ACN reporters to continue digging in this operation. This leads them down the rabbit hole of every tweet posted around the time and place of the alleged operation, with a translator translating all the tweets to English and faxing it back to them. Just when it seems hopeless, and they have to drop the story, they receive a series of tweets from a user named Homni8, involving many of the details revealed earlier by Eric. White smoke, helicopters, grenades, men in gas, machine guns, burning, Americans. The story seems to finally be taking shape for both Mackenzie and Charlie. The trail continues when someone being interviewed by ACN for their role in Occupy Wall Street reveals to ACN that she has a friend in OWS who got a non-governmental organization shut down by the Pakistani government due to a report he wrote, which said that U.S. troops use chemical weapons on civilians. Jerry and the rest of ACN tracked down the source as being Leon Diet, a former staff member of the Commission of Human Rights in Conflict Zones, who was sent to interview survivors of a raid of U.S. military forces and wrote a report on his findings. After Mackenzie introduces this information to Charlie, she asks what are some common signs of a person exposed to sarin gas. He says vomiting, severe muscle twitches, and death by choking on their own vomit. These signs are found in his report. 5 months later, Charlie gets a visit from a friend from the Office of Naval Intelligence, asking why Jerry has been asking questions about an operation called Genoa. And after not so subtly implying his knowledge and perspective of the operation, he hands Charlie a crumpled up piece of paper. He informs Mackenzie that it's a Hilo manifest from an Operation Genoa. While it doesn't have sarin gas listed as one of the items, it does have MX76, which does not exist. This pushes Charlie to flatly state that they had used sarin. Now, Jerry and Mackenzie decide to present their information to a red team, consisting of Don, Jim, and Sloan, which is used to present an important story to journalists who have no prior knowledge of an event to see how it holds up to fresh faces. In this meeting, they present the details of the alleged operation and the sources they have: Cyrus West, Eric Sweeney, Homni 8, Leon Diet, and Charlie's confidential naval source. Jim and Don, being the most vocal of the group, heavily doubt the story and bring up numerous suspicions they have. Charlie still thinks they're very close to proving it, but agrees that it's not ready for air. They decide to interview one more source, a retired 3-star general named Stomtanovich, who has knowledge on America's chemical weapons, and as Charlie and Mackenzie discover prior, possibly Genoa itself. In the interview, Jerry directly asks the general if we use sarin. The general never directly confirms it, only explaining what would have been done if they had used sarin. Jerry, upset at the lack of a confirmation, does the one thing that earns this season its placement in this video essay. He alters the footage to make it seem like Stomtanovich confirmed the use of sarin. At the second red team meeting, Jerry presents the footage he altered. Charlie, shaken by the general's previous memory mistakes, is not satisfied and wants another witness. Not long after, ACN gets a call from a Herman Valenzuela, a man who was part of Genoa who was believed to have died years earlier. This brings a third red team meeting where Jerry presents his 7 sources one final time: West, Sweeney, Homni 8, Diet, Charlie Source, Stomtanovich, and Valenzuela. 7 different sources. And with Will seeing it all for the first time, with the approval of Charlie and Mac, Will approves it as well, and the story is brought to air. Stomtanovich angrily calls ACN immediately after the piece, explaining that his words were edited out of context. The following day at noon, ACN gets an email from the Department of Defense, letting them know that they are prepared to take legal action against their false claims. Tensions are rising, with pushback between the media and the military. Then, all the sources start getting outed. The night after the story aired, Elliot Hirsch was interviewing Eric Sweeney when Sweeney revealed that he had previously suffered a traumatic brain injury. Mackenzie believes he led Valenzuela, a witness who is also revealed to not be the Herman Valenzuela who was part of Genoa and who actually died. Charlie's source reveals that he faked the manifesto and his information on Genoa after ACN fired his son, which led him to commit suicide. Finally, Mackenzie discovers that the raw footage has been edited due to a shot clock discrepancy with the college basketball game in the background of the general's interview. Jerry is immediately fired, ACN runs a retraction of the entire story, and Will, Mac, and Charlie offer up their resignations, none of which are accepted. This entire story is truly the stuff that is made for television, incredibly complex, full of dramatic reveals, and devastating in its outcome. It's the type of story that feels highly unrealistic that could only be scripted, and yet, truth is stranger than fiction once again. In 1998, CNN aired a story about a covert incursion from the Marines in Laos during the Vietnam War in 1970 called Operation Tailwind. It also alleged that U.S. forces had used sarin gas on civilians and was similarly disproven in its findings. 2 of the senior producers of the story were fired, and CNN had to run multiple retractions. The only major and important factor altered between the 2 stories was that Operation Tailwind did not have a figure like Jerry Dantana behind the scenes altering raw footage and actively deceiving his coworkers. Instead, the places where the CNN producers messed up was in their misleading trick questions that skewed the answers of one of the subjects interviewed. But Jerry Dantana isn't the important takeaway from the storyline. It's everyone else involved with reporting Operation Genoa. Despite the several different sources they were able to obtain for the story, and the many hours of work put into making sure the story was as verifiable as possible, the reporters of ACM were led to a direction into which they believed this story was inevitable, leading to rounds of questions that presumed the answers. It was reporting with good intentions, but with missed results. The fact that Charlie, Mackenzie, and Will send in resignation letters is telling of how much they know they messed up, and the show's impressive adaptation of this real-world story into its own reality exemplifies how quickly news can crumble when done poorly. But while this example showcased an effective recreation of the news done wrong over nearly an entire season of television, the following example showcased an even more effective image of the news done right in just 8 minutes. On January 8, 2011, at 10:10 a.m., a gunman opened fire on a crowd of people in Tucson, Arizona. The intended target of the shooting was Congresswoman Gabrielle Giffords. She was shot in the head, 6 others were killed, and 14 were wounded, including the shooter himself. At 2:12 p.m., NPR released a breaking news tweet based off the words of a local newscaster that Giffords had been shot and killed without any original source to back up that claim. This report was then followed by each of the major cable news networks, Fox News, MSNBC, and CNN. Eventually, conflicting reports started to arise, and by 3 p.m., NPR changed their official position on Giffords' condition from killed to unknown, with public apologies following the next day. Fast forward to Season 1, Episode 4 of The Newsroom. Airing on July 15, 2012, it was an episode full of glasses of liquid in the face, love triangle drama, and a New Year's Eve party with both of those things. And although the show does tackle the ways in which conservatives lied about President Obama's record on guns and his travel expenses, the 59-minute episode has mainly spent its time on the interpersonal and sometimes silly drama between its characters. At least that's the case at the show's 51-minute mark. At this point, Neil is telling his co-workers about Bigfoot. Jim and Maggie have temporarily settled their beef revolving around their not-so-subtle attraction to one another, and Will's dates with women have landed him in the tabloids and in hot water with Mackenzie, who would like to no longer be Will's executive producer. All this leads to a familiar swell of music and a news alert that sends shockwaves through Maggie. As Coldplay's Fix You is getting queued up, Maggie runs to Will's office to inform the staff of the alert she just got. When they all leave the office, and Mackenzie tells the newsroom,
What's going on?
All hands, there's been a shooting in Tucson and a Congresswoman, Gabrielle Giffords, been shot in the head.
And just like that, everybody focuses up and does their job. They're all making phone calls, communicating with each other, desperately seeking the most accurate information they can find as soon as they can find it. Will's getting his suit, getting ready to go on the air. Mackenzie's setting up shop behind the scenes, prepared to air the breaking news to an audience of millions. They start reporting the circumstances of the crime and that the Congresswoman's condition is critical, but not yet fatal. Maggie eventually tells Jim that NPR is saying she's dead. When she confirms that no one else is saying it, Jim rejects the report. So does Mackenzie. Eventually, the president of Atlantis World Media, Reese Lansing, enters the newsroom, demanding why they haven't reported her death. He then enters the studio.
30 seconds.
What's going on?
I'll call security.
Every second you're not current, 1,000 people are changing the channel to the guy who is. That's the business you're in. MSNBC, Fox, and CNN all say she's dead. Don, tell him. Don!
It's a person. A doctor pronounces her dead, not the news.
Will decides to continue with the information they have until ACN receives word that she is indeed alive from multiple sources. This leads to Will triumphantly and hilariously shouting with Charlie, Mac, and Don about their roles as journalists and their defiance of their corporate bosses, in a perfect cap to the best sequence in the entire show and one of the best pieces of screenplay writing I've ever seen. Operation Genoa was a stark reminder of the danger that can come from incorrectly reporting the news. The reporting of the Gabrielle Giffords shooting was the same thing, just from the opposite perspective. It illustrates the importance of a media that is transparent in its delivery of information when people need it the most. And it's one of the few times in the entire running of the show when Aaron Sorkin is obvious in his subtext. There's nothing more important than telling the truth. Sorkin says he's not an expert in anything, and that he doesn't know nothing. But he knows enough to understand that honesty is unquestionable. The cries of fake news in our modern society can only hold up to the masses if the news is truly fake. If there's one theme running through the pages of the screenplays of the newsroom, it's the necessity of honest reporting. Through all the melodrama, character dynamics, pop culture references, and corporate plotting, there's people trying to do the news. That's exactly why the last few minutes of the show's series finale is just that, people doing the news. In the newsroom, the studio, and behind the anchor's desk, people are trying to find information and pass it on to those who seek it out, without the influence of people who want that transmission altered. Is this the exact same scene at all the news stations of the country? I don't know. I can't be a fly on the wall. But I'll tell you this much. If it's not, we risk it all.
Good evening.